There's no cookie for being early on the train. I think there's just the belief that the work is important and that you are making a difference in how this will impact our industry and our colleagues.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. Those veterinary professionals who can imagine themselves in diverse roles, whether in practice, data, business, or technology, are the ones shaping the future of our profession. This podcast is about reimagining what life in vet med can be. And today, I have someone who is a major leader in reimagining veterinary medicine, Dr. Jules Benson. It's also a timely episode because the Veterinary Innovation Summit was about a week prior to our recording the episode, so he was fresh out the highlight of the year. Jules has a fascinating career path, and it's an example of how broad a veterinarian's impact can be. From his early days in vet school with mentors planting the seeds of possibility, to growing pet insurance companies, to leading data and strategy, he's built a career that blends science, creativity, and business, all in the service of veterinary medicine and the people and animals it touches. Today, he is the chair of the Veterinary Innovation Council and has his own consulting business. Dr. Jules contributed some insights in our mini Future Predicting series back in January, so I'll link that episode in the show notes. But in this episode, you'll hear how Dr. Jules has navigated unexpected pivots, why innovation matters for the future of the profession, and how thinking differently about your career and veterinary medicine can open new doors for impact. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Jules Benson. When did you know you were interested in veterinary medicine?
I was not one of the many who say I was 5 and I knew I wanted to do this. I think I always taught at school. I really loved the humanities side of things and the English literature side of things. And then in the UK, at 16, you get to the end of kind of the standard school journey. You get to choose then to stratify your subjects. So you get to choose basically 4 main subjects to choose from 16 to 18. And so I said that choice of like, do I go with that, more humanities, artsy business side, or do I try and go science? So I went full science, maths, physics, chemistry. And when I was 18, when I finished that as part of my education, I had a place to read marine zoology for undergraduate. And so then I took a gap year and I went and worked in Northern Africa with a wildlife project. And it was there working with the Bedouin and some of the indigenous tribes out there, and working with their wildlife and working in concert with a medical student who was doing the human side. And like I was working on the veterinary side. And to me, I just never considered it before, this kind of confluence of both science and art. Like, and we always talk about the art of veterinary medicine. I think it was just the element of like, okay, this actually seems like it makes a lot of sense for where my interests lie. So from there, I was able to get into a kind of a graduation program because I didn't have any experience. I hadn't worked in a vet clinic or worked on a farm my whole life. And so Liverpool University said, hey, if you go and do this extra course at De Montfort University, we'll let you in next year. And so this was a year of, working on dairy farms and with beef cattle and showing cows in hand at the Royal Lincolnshire Show. And just like really like rich experiences, like working with pigs, which I still enjoy. And in my career later, I got to work with a lot of big people. That sounds weird. I got a lot of people to work with a lot of swine colleagues. And I really enjoy the data behind like the large animal mentality and also just the pragmatism of a lot of those folks, which when you get into companion and equine, maybe that can be a lot more, there's a lot more, not sensitivity, but there's a lot more touch points. Whereas I think with large animal, it can feel, I think there's a lot more, comradeship around how do we do this together as a, from a herd point of view. Sorry. So I went off on several different tangents in there.
Well, and that's such a good call out because I've done several interviews recently with bovine practitioners, and we talked about that. And both on the human side of things, it's very much a team effort with the herd mentality. And I want to come back to that because I love that you got this wide range of experience early on before actually getting into the vet education side of things. But I know because technology is such a key point in your interest and your path throughout as well, that technology was also an interest early on. And I think you told me that you built your first computer at age 15.
Yeah.
So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you got interested in technology and maybe how that kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I think it's just a nerdy thing. I think it was just the way my brain works. So like, I think, you have like maths people and non-maths people. And I think I was always a maths person. So like that logic always made sense to me. And I think computing to me was just an extension of that. So it's funny, it was working in a computer store, like from, I think from age like 14 to 17 in the town I grew up in. And that was kind of born out of video games. Like, there was an interest in video games. And then it just kind of developed into like, oh, these actually the computing side and the personal computing side. This was like, I probably told you my first computer to age myself was a 486 SX25, which is, at this point, our phones are probably 50 times more capable than what that computer was. But it certainly got me interested in the technology side. So all through my career, it's always been, whether it's, I need help fixing my keyboard, or whether it's, let's understand more about how, computer networks work, or how, software integrates. I've been able to keep a level of being that interpreter between technology and business, which has been super helpful for my career.
Oh, yeah, because there's such a gap of understanding. I
Yeah.
mean, on the science side sometimes. So I guess when going back to as you were getting into vet school, you had this
Sure.
really unique experience seeing different animals. It sounds like you were enjoying all aspects.
Yeah.
Did you yet start to form what you thought being a veterinarian would look like? Did that kind of change over your education? How did that go?
It was interesting, right? So I think the first 3 years in the UK are preclinical. So you're learning your biochemistry and your pharmacology and your anatomy and all those things. And I think there's just so much focus on it's just a broad brush, right? You at that point there's no real species specific. Like, we're learning all the things, and is there an emphasis on companion animal? Probably. But it wasn't until I got to the third year, and in the UK you don't have to do undergraduate, right? Your vet degree is 5 years in most schools, 6 years in others, but you don't have to do an undergraduate degree. So you can do this thing called intercalation, right? So in the middle of your veterinary degree, you can intercalate an additional bachelor's degree. So you've got enough grounding in whatever those hard sciences are to say, okay, you can do another science degree in a year where it would usually take 3 years. So I was the first intake year of a new degree that was started by my professor and mentor, Malcolm Bennett, which was veterinary conservation medicine. So this was a study specific to, metapopulations, breeding, genetics, like just these areas I found fascinating. And I think to me, one of the things I took from that, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day when we talk about, I think we're very good at talking tactically in veterinary medicine. We're very good at solving problems. And so talking to Professor Bennett, and, one of the things that really stuck with me was we're talking about doing, conservation work. And he said, there's this romanticism of like leaning out of the helicopter and darting a rhino or something. And it's like, and of course, like that is part of this work, but it's also purely technical. Like, you could train somebody to do that job and train them to do it very well. You don't have to be a veterinarian, but the impact you can have with your degree and your experience in a boardroom somewhere to actually, conserve habitat, or to work at the political level, or to have a greater view on, how diseases spread, on the epidemiology of things. Like, to me, that was just such an enormous impact of saying like, oh, like we actually have a bigger responsibility, even if we enjoy. And I think I look at it in the clinic, right? The things like, why am I placing a catheter? It's like, because I enjoy the technical aspect of that, and it's something that doesn't require my full brain. And so I think there's always that element of like, if we have capabilities to do the next task up the tree, how do we get to that? And that to me was just such an insight into, we should always be striving to practice the top of our capability, and then bringing up everyone else below us to fill in those tasks. Yeah.
I don't think people realize, and again, the reason for this podcast is to
Yeah.
show the opportunities and, the way you're presenting it, almost the responsibility for people in veterinary medicine, and how you can live that out in so many different ways. So yeah, to get that perspective so early on, I'm sure that helped kind of open up the possibilities for yourself.
Well, and it was only by stepping outside of pure
Yeah.
veterinary medicine. This was in this degree, and I think this was Malcolm's, like, this was his job to crack people's brains open and to change them a little bit. And if he got, 2 people out of 8 every year who felt like, he changed their mindset, I think that was good for him. And again, our intake of 8 people, I think everybody went off and did super interesting things. I see this as a transformative, experience for so many of us. But I think coming out of that and then going back into veterinary medicine, I think it really helped me understand I do enjoy the practice of veterinary medicine, but I also knew I probably didn't want to be in it forever. That I always had what is the next thing I should or could be doing with the skills and the capability that we have. And that's again, not to diminish practice. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in practice, and we can talk about that. I was very lucky in where I landed. But I think just saying, if you have that interest and if you have that spark to say, and again, this can happen within the practice. Like if you want to grow into a practice and through ownership or into specialty or whatever else, I think those paths are also amazing. But I think if you have the interest outside of that, I think there used to be more places you could go. I think things have shut down a little bit now, as probably your experience as well, Megan. But we can certainly talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think things are shifting. I've always been a very positive person in this area. So I will remain positive because I think as the future changes, opportunities change. So that growth mindset, always looking for what is the next thing that I can contribute to and grow myself as well is a good mindset. Now, as you were starting and you talked about getting into practice, did you feel like having that foundation of working in a general practice was a good place to start, or why
Yeah.
did you decide to go that direction with this kind of planted?
Well, so there's a gap there. So between graduating vet school and coming to the US, so at the time I met my ex-wife in, my third year. And then when I graduated, I came over here. But of course, Liverpool was not AVMA accredited. So I had to take not just NAVLE, which we all had to take, but also the CFVG, the Educational Commission for Foreign Veterinary Graduates exam, which is, and I was just talking to somebody at the Innovation Summit about this, like just the brutality of this exam. It's a 3.5 day practical exam across, multiple disciplines. And a friend of mine now invigilates the exams in Las Vegas. But there was a long waiting list for that. And it was $6,000+ when I did it. And I'm sure it's more now. And so for 2 summers, I did landscaping in suburban Philadelphia. And I worked as a shipping manager for a company that shipped a lot of fabric and cut fabric, which was, so it was a very interesting as someone who had that education level to come in and to be, frankly, working with immigrant labor and just to kind of see, it's funny, it's coming from the UK where we talk about, we have such a distinct class system, and the US, not to get political, but the US has always said that, that it hasn't, but just to see how people treat, manual laborers, and just like, it was a really interesting introduction, and not that it was the same, like many people were very, very kind, some people were less so, but it was a very interesting introduction into kind of suburban American life. So then, yes, I managed to land a place in a practice just outside Philadelphia, so in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And it was a phenomenal practice. I was so lucky, honestly. I heard people talk, kind of had nightmare experiences as a new graduate where, and I had interviews like this where somebody literally told me, my goal is to go out and play on my boat, and you are boat fuel. Like that was what I was told by the practitioner. I was like, okay, this sounds like a warm and fuzzy place. But the practice I ended up in was fantastic. The 2 owners couldn't have been more generous with their time and their mentorship. And within the first year, like, 'cause I even heard things in general practice that a lot of new grads weren't able to do surgery because the owners and the senior associates wanted to do that themselves because they enjoyed it. And so that was, experience of people I worked with. Within the first year, I was doing, perineal urethrostomies, and I was doing cruciate ligament repairs. And like, they were just, and it was, I didn't know it at the time, but they were very spectrum of care as well. Like my first amputation, it was a dog that would have been euthanized, and the owner said, hey, I've got two associates who've never done an amputation. We'll do it for $500. And just know that's the situation. And like, and the amputation, and he was there in the next room. So there was never really any risk, but it was a great experience. And Mary Landis and I, the other veterinarian, was like, this is so fantastic for us to be able to have this experience and to be able to solve a problem for a pet family as well. So even before I got into the whole, care accessibility and spectrum of care, this practice, we're really living that life of like, how do we provide a solution that makes sense for the most people at the right time?
Oh, wow. And it was a busy, big practice too, right? I think I saw that it was like 8 doctors.
Yeah, I think so. It was a mixture of full-time associates and part-time associates, but I think that was also helpful in just that some of even some of the part-time associates had such a good different perspective. And I think working with that many different associates, you really get to understand how people practice differently, which again, from a perspective and from a career point of view, for me, has been really instrumental, because I think the practice allowed people to kind of go their own way within the protocols. They would set protocols, obviously, vaccination protocols and blood work and everything else. But within your ability to practice yourself, they were pretty like, okay, you do the things that you think you need to do. which, we hear a lot of stories about that at the moment, that's not necessarily how people are able to practice medicine in some settings. But it was just a fantastic, I mean, again, especially from, and I love doing surgery. I really enjoyed that element of the job. To be able to do complex surgery and dental procedures, that early in my career was really formative for me.
Yeah. Now, I saw that just a couple of years after you started, you went to part-time because it sounds like you got an opportunity with Pet Plan, a pet insurance group.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's fairly quick out of vet school. So, how did that happen?
It was interesting. So it was actually when I didn't have my license, I'd started working, and I kind of talked to a recruiter and said, "Hey, I don't have my license, but anything that is veterinary related, I could do from an advisory point of view." And so they connected me to the founding partners at Pet Plan, and I'd met with them, and over the years, and this is now my understanding of how startups go. It was all like, we're going to launch in April, we're going to launch in August, we're going to launch in December, and of course, it just keeps going on. And again, the insurance is even more complicated because it's so highly regulated. So it really was 3 years later, hey, we think we have a role. And so to me, I was like, okay, I'm really enjoying practice. And I think there were opportunities, down the road with the practice, but I also kind of came back to the element of like, I don't think I want to do this forever. Like I thoroughly enjoyed my time in practice. I really enjoyed, we all have that 95% of the clients are amazing. I would almost say it's like 95% of the clients are amazing and 5% were really amazing. Like just like, you make lifelong friendships, and, it was great going to part-time because then you got to see basically half your appointments with people that you loved and just got to see those pets throughout their lifetimes, which is also great. But the insurance thing, the moving into corporate, which at that time I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that this was an opportunity to do something else. And so I think it was employee number 8 or 9 when I joined. Over 8 years, we grew that to 160 people, I think. And so that was just a wealth of experience. And for me, even more on the technology side, being able to head, technology transformation projects, being able to run a team of actuarial analytics staff, being involved in the marketing and the spokesperson stuff. It's just like such a rich array of things that you get to do. And being a startup, there's a lot of fires. So there wasn't always a plan, but there was always something interesting to do. And again, just the people that you work with, startup life is very much, you're in the trenches. And, the reason that you fight is because of the people alongside you, not necessarily always for the higher cause, right? My wife and I, like, we worked together there as well. We didn't actually meet at Pet Plan, but we worked together for a long time. And many of the people that I've worked with since, like, we've been coming back to the same teams because you build those, really deep bonds of like, not just, really enjoying that person, but also just working together well. So I have people that I've worked with over 3 or 4 jobs now because there's just that gravity of bringing people back together again.
That is a really lucky situation to
Yeah.
be able to find those types of people. And I think I feel that now because my new role feels very similar. Like the people that I'm working with are just amazing.
Yeah.
And the importance of finding those good colleagues to kind of keep and surround yourself with, I think is really important for job satisfaction, keeping you going despite the fires. And I think it does take a certain person to be able to be in that type of role and in a startup role when you have a lot of hats. You have, like you said, lots of fires. There's not always very likely not a plan. You are the plan. You're
Yeah.
creating the plan as you're flying the plane kind of thing. But during that time, did your mentor from your schooling come back to you when you're thinking about the impact that you were having in your role?
So it's interesting. So I actually, I went back to the UK fairly regularly as part of my role at Pet Plan, and then in my subsequent role in the agency, not the CIA, a different agency, just to clarify. And I got to see Malcolm a couple of times, and I think it was super interesting to him to see, and again, the seeing, some of my other classmates on Facebook, like a lot of us have gone on to do weird things. And even within our profession, even those who are staying strictly within the practice space have gone on to do different variations, whether it's peripatetic, work, or whether it's setting up agencies within veterinary medicine. So like, again, I think that mindset, I hope I haven't talked to Malcolm for a couple of years, but I'd be interested to maybe sit down with him sometime and kind of pick his brain on whether he feels like he had that impact. Because I think we all look back and say, yeah, that this was a absolutely a turning point or a tipping point in our careers. And maybe we didn't tell him that clearly enough.
I think we often don't tell the people, like especially our teachers,
Yeah.
enough how much impact they have. But yeah, teachers can be such a huge part of
Yeah.
our lives and definitely our career journeys for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, a lot of startups, their goals are to sell and move
Sure.
on. But how did that work out for you with Pet Plan and then going into your next position?
It's a little different. So
Yeah.
Pet Plan, like the ownership did evolve over time, but you also, with insurance, you're often not underwriting the policy. The company who sells the policy, unless it's a nationwide, you don't always write on the same paper, if you like. So we went through 3 or 4 different underwriters in my time at Pet Plan. And so that was always an interesting situation of like, product evolution and relationship evolution and changing to maybe more corporate type, rigor and regulation, which as you grow is inevitable. And I think that for me was where things started to maybe get less interesting, was as the organization grows, the number of hats, that you wear by necessity must become fewer. And so your role becomes more narrow and you get more depth within that role. But to me, it was like, okay, I feel like I'm missing that breadth. And so, I mean, 8 years, there's not that many of us that live these days who get to work somewhere for 8 years, and I forget how long that was. But we achieved an immense amount. And again, I think it's more my view of achievement is what did we as a team do? Not what was the achievement that I did or the company did, but like just looking at the boulders that no one will ever know about that we moved out of the way through sheer determination and teamwork. And you talked before about the forged in fire aspect of some of those relationships. Like we still have text threads from people in those days. And so Steve Shell, who many of you will know, like Steve Shell and I worked together during that time at Pet Plan. And, every time Steve and I see each other, it's great to see him. And not even a glory days mentality, just remember what we went through. Like, let's relive, relive some of that. So it's always, and as I said, I still get to work with some of the people that I worked with at Pet Plan as well. And so you don't even talk about it anymore, but it's just a shared bond, which is amazing.
Well, that's another reminder too that this profession is very small, and so
Yes.
you never know when you will work with somebody again. They'll always, be your best human
Yeah.
being.
Yeah. I think this yes, 100%. I think it's easy to read that sometimes as compromise yourself, but I think you can be kind and be direct at the same time. And I think I don't always do the best job of that, I would say, but I think being a genuine human being and, trying to ensure that it's not just a zero-sum game and that you are, benefiting whoever you work with at the same time. If that's not an instinct that you have, like, I think that's a really important thing to ensure that kind of people remember.
Definitely. And I guess before I gloss over it, you also, it looks like you started to join the Pennsylvania VMA too and get involved with some organized medicine
Yeah.
as well, which
Yeah.
I always think is a unique perspective is to understand
Yeah.
that side of it. And I think you worked with them for quite a while. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anything that stands out with, kind of working with them?
No, I mean, just the people again. I think it was helpful for me. I mean, I'd never been on a board. I didn't know what Robert's rules were. I didn't really understand that process. So even just from a purely technical point of view, it's been super helpful going forwards. Just like having, being able to take a back seat for a couple of years and understand how these things work. But similarly, the exposure to so many different types of people, whether it's practice owners, whether it's people on the reg side, whether it's understanding the state legislature a little bit better. And again, this was very much a people-driven, as veterinary medicine is a people and relationship-driven organization. And so even just at AVMA, seeing, Charlene Wanslack, who used to be the executive director and is now at Heart and Paw in a senior role, like it's just like, again, just great, forged in fire, relationships, and just so good to see people. And as you said, people keep rotating around. You'll always see those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you went to Circa after that, and in the middle of that was when the Veterinary Innovation Summit started, I think, if I have
Yes.
the
Yes.
track.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you're
And
right.
if you were not at the first, you were at one of
I was
the
at the
earlier
second. Yeah.
second one. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you,
No, never quite cool enough to be right there at the beginning, but yeah.
that's pretty close. That's pretty close. especially when it was started at Texas and you were over, in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I think that's fair.
I definitely flew to the wrong airport at one point. I think you were supposed to fly into Houston, and I flew into Dallas, or there was something, and I had a 3 hour drive. Some
I was gonna say
lessons
Texas is
learned.
big. If you miss it, you miss it.
It's a good job it wasn't Galveston or something. Yeah, absolutely. No, it was yeah, the Innovation Summit. Yeah, Circa Healthcare. I mean, just start there. Like, that was also based on relationships. So Steve Curtin, the founder and president there, another Brit, and we just knew each other through working together a little bit at Petplan. Developed a friendship, and as I was kind of looking around to see what the next thing was, like, it happened that the chief veterinary officer role at Circa was kind of open, and so we kind of have a conversation, and I was very open and said, like, I don't know the work you do. Like, I know what I've done here. I don't know marketing and strategy well. And he's like, well, I have faith that you will learn what you need to learn. And I give a huge amount of credit to my time at Circa for really helping to bring together, because I think what I got from Petplan was so much experience of, like, these are the things that happen. These are the business problems that exist. These are the ways you can address them. But I don't think my role was fully strategic there. I don't think I really understood what that meant, honestly, when I was at Petplan. Like, it was just like, okay, we have a plan. We know what our revenue numbers are. We know what the fires are. Let's just go and do stuff. And maybe that was, my level of maturity at the time. But moving into Circa, where you're working with, large pharmaceutical companies and nutrition companies and nonprofits, and just this diversity across vet med, small animals, swine, cattle. It was, for me, it was just such an education and such a great experience. Again, working with more people, there's clients that we worked with there that I still have really good relationships with now, which, that is very much the agency kind of model, is that you should accidentally build personal relationships and not just have them feel like commercial relationships. I think that's, super important in the agency world. But yeah, just to become much more of a strategic thinker. And that's, not to jump ahead, but that's a lot of the work I do now, is helping organizations develop their, whether it's their positioning or their strategy or the strategic planning or brand planning. It comes out of experience. And I think it also comes back down to that mindset. I think melding that creativity with the logical, I think the folks that I've ended up working with a lot, we talk about that a lot. And I don't know how much of that is innate versus learned. There's an element of both, but I think there's not that many people who have, I think, the ability to fully have a good creative side, where they're good writers, they're good at creative thinking and melding that with the logic of what are our goals and how do we achieve this and how do we break that down? How do we eat this elephant one bite at a time? Like, where do you start with that? So I think it's a combination of innate talent and skill building, but there's only a few people I've met who I feel like, oh, you get it straight away. And I think it's rare across not just our industry, but as I've kind of been out in the world and worked at multinational corporations and places without veterinary medicine in them, I don't think it's just rare in veterinary medicine. I think it's rare in the world.
It's an interesting perspective. But I mean, I just had a conversation with somebody about leveraging those types of ways of thinking and skill sets in the veterinary setting, in a clinical setting where you've got a patient, you've got a client that's sitting in front of you with a unique need and a set of situations.
Yeah.
And, going back to a spectrum of care or whatever, we want to call that now, is that it requires that creativity. It requires that ability to think about options and things. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking, wow, what a unique set of skills that you have and perspective, that yes, you're a veterinarian, you understand the clinical side, but you're able to understand all these other really key aspects of just success in general for businesses of any type. And especially the marketing side, like an ad agency and marketing, there's so much creativity to it. And I think that's why I fell in love with it too, was when I realized that marketing were two things. It was psychology, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
And creativity. And it really is that creative side of your brain. And I think no matter who you are, I think most people have some need for creativity.
For sure. Yeah.
And to be able to have space to kind of develop that, I think is really fun. And especially in an area that you're so interested in, and can, again, make a big difference in some of these decision-making kind of worlds of business.
Well, and we'll talk about the Innovation Summit stuff later, but I just wrote a piece for today's Veterinary Business a couple of months ago, which was kind of talking about the iron triangle of healthcare, so cost, quality, access. Like if we change one of those things, if we change what something costs, we reduce the access to it, and the quality may get better because it costs more. Like those things are, yeah, we can talk about how we measure quality at some point as well. But as you look at veterinary practices, and I've spent a lot of time recently looking at website practices, and I'm like, based on this, I don't know where you stand on this scale. And I think it's because we as a profession, we're so trapped, mostly so trapped in like, we want to deliver the highest quality care. And it's like, okay, that's great. And that is certainly a great medical option. But when we talk about accessibility of care, especially in today's world where, the cost of care has increased so dramatically over the past 10 years, and that affects the access so much, what are you presenting yourself as a practice? If you have a practice down, and this is just a basic marketing thing as well, like how are you differentiating yourself from practice down the road? Is it just that you're more friendly? Okay, well, the other guys can get more friendly. Like what is the thing that you do that nobody else does? And a lot of the time that means saying no to things. Like my biggest belief is that strategy is about saying no. Like, if you have a strategy for your year and someone comes along and says, I want to do this great thing with you, if that doesn't fit into your strategy, you better have a really good reason why you're going to bring that in, because you've set a plan and you've said this is our goal for a reason. And so I think the practice is a really good microcosm of how do you bring strategy and like that tactical execution together. And as an owner operator, I think it's immensely difficult, because going back to the catheter example earlier, the temptation is always to put out that fire, which in this case is a pet that is suffering or a family that's in need. And so it's always a noble thing to not step back, but to get involved in the details. And I think the hardest thing, and Peter Weinstein talks about this, is working on the business, not in the business. So I think it's a real challenge. I think it's one of those things where, and I've talked to a lot of owners recently, and I think the owners who have the most discipline around saying, I know that I need those hours every week to sit back and say, what is my strategy? How am I thinking about my cogs? How am I thinking about, our capacity by adding another doctor? How am I thinking about my differentiation in the local marketplace? What are the services I can and should offer that change that? So I totally agree with you. I think it's a really hard thing to bring together. And especially when we have all these skills that are immediately gratifying, it does come back down to immediate. I mean, I love surgery because it's so immediately gratifying. I'm like, I fixed this thing. And until I mess with people, I'm like, oh no, I have no interest in following this thing for 1,000 years. I want that immediate gratification. And so I get it. And I think it's a really hard discipline issue to step back and say, I need to not do this. I need to find someone who's going to do this for me. And I can spend my time on the things that again, I have the capability or the perspective for that others don't.
Yeah. Perspective. And there's, I think, some element of ownership too, right? Like, yeah, you have that ownership, which causes you to have the responsibility, but hopefully the passion behind it too, because again, the responsibility of taking care of everybody within that ecosystem and everything from the pet to the client to your team, is really special and deserves the time to step back and look at those things.
Yeah. The prioritization is hard. And again, this is not a knock on anyone who's doing this on a day-to-day basis, which I'm not currently. It's admirable to watch practitioners who can say, I don't want to be at this management level. Because there's the Peter principle as well, right? There's the element of like, I've been elevated within my practice to a medical director, and it comes with a bunch of stuff I didn't want. Can I step back down and go back into this, or does that feel like that's going to hurt my career? And I think those are really valid questions. But I think if you're interested in leadership and you're interested in that challenge, there's an element of discipline there to say, I need to take myself out of the day-to-day. And if I'm not in a position where that's happening, what do I need to do to change that? If that's changing practice, if that's, looking at my ownership structure, if that's looking at my staffing structure, I think those are the hard questions we can ask ourselves.
And that's a good point. Not everybody enjoys that part.
No, and shouldn't. Yeah.
So one is that an element that is an evil of the job that you still enjoy the overall job, or is it a sign that maybe that isn't your position, that, growth and career trajectory is different in a different direction? And I think sometimes people think that is the only direction, or do I get degraded back down? Like I don't want people to think it that way. I disagree. I think there's other opportunities to grow and develop yourself. But yeah, I think sometimes we make that look like that is the only way.
100%. Yeah, I've seen several people come out of industry and go back into owning a practice just because things make more sense and are more predictable and controllable, and your efforts, you can see the impact that you're having. Whereas I think when you sit in a large organization, it can often be so hard to feel that you're making, not least because you're so removed often from the end user, from the pet family, but also because you're serving a greater purpose, right? Ultimately, if you work for a corporation, if it's a for-profit corporation, there's a guiding principle behind that. So I think if you move back into practice, especially if you're an independent practice, you get to have a lot more control over what you do.
Yeah. And I think again, it's we don't have to look at it as going backwards, right? You take what you learn and you
100%.
move it
Yeah.
forward. You can go and apply that to the next step, taking what you've learned forward. And you as well, you've had all this experience and then you get an opportunity to work at Nationwide. So what was that like moving into this? I mean, you've already had a background in insurance. So was this like
Yeah.
deja vu?
It wasn't intentional. It's funny. So I don't know if you know Dr. Karen McConnell, who was my predecessor at Nationwide.
Yeah.
She was very active in the VVMA. She was an early sponsor of the multicultural VMA. She's such a champion for, I think, individual veterinarians and the profession at large. So she's an enormous mentor and just such a stalwart of the profession. So I can never say enough good things about Carol. So Carol was looking to retire, she's super smart and savvy. And so she retired at a very young age comparatively. And she was looking for someone to replace her Nationwide. And I think I wasn't looking to get back into insurance specifically, but I was also, my goal was always to use data to help improve the lives of all the stakeholders, pets, pet families, and veterinary healthcare teams. And I was like, okay, that's the largest insurer, in the US, and they probably have some data I can play with. And I think I can make a strategic, plan around why we should be doing better work with this. And Carol and I were so aligned on so many things, but our backgrounds and skill sets were so different. And I think kind of me bringing that data oriented and technology oriented mindset with me, I think she saw as a huge opportunity for the organization. So I was fortunate to get the role there. As always, going into a new role, the first 12 or 18 months is trying to kind of get your feet under you, trying to understand the politics. And of course, this happened right at the beginning of COVID. So I moved to, there's a terrible, not terrible, but funny story about me living in a trailer in someone's driveway. And this was, again, very kind of Carol and her husband, Eric, to lend me this trailer that he used to use for his car. But I'm living in this person's driveway in November of 2019, I guess, right? So I wanted to be on the ground, and my wife and I had every plan to move there, but she was teaching at Temple and Philly at the time, and so couldn't move until April or May the next year. And so I'm like, okay, now I want to get into it. I want to make sure that my face is seen, that I'm not just a remote worker. I want to get into the culture. So I started living in this trailer. Then COVID happened. And so I'm stuck in this trailer 24/7 in this metal box. And we had the rainiest February on record, I think, for California. And it was just this thundering rain on this. So it was one of those things where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, if my brain is going to get through this process. Like, not that it was a huge hardship, but just like, you're so used to human interaction. And so we moved eventually to California. Just before recording, we were talking about your recent move, and it's a thing. But we moved to California in April or May, and I never went into the office again pretty much because we had COVID, and then we went fully remote. So moved to Orange County for this role. As I said, 12 months, 18 months, getting my feet underneath me, getting the lay of the land. And then we started to make some really good progress on using the Nationwide data to publish white papers and to create digital platforms and to use the data in meaningful and interesting ways and to start pet health programs around population health management. So just really the things I'd had in my mind from pet plan days, having the opportunity to realize these things and to introduce them into an organization in a strategic manner, talking about, the value of our data and how do we enrich our data? How do we do a better job? And in that time, kind of really, whetting my appetite for greater data strategy. So, meeting awesome folks in the industry, like we already talked about John Luscard, and he's just such a huge force. And then hiring the right people, like being able to, I didn't have a huge team when I started, but being able to go out and define roles and hire people. So my longtime collaborator, who Dr. Emily Tincher, that's become an enormous powerhouse partnership and certainly a force multiplier where I think we certainly have many common skill sets. We also bring different things to the equation. So even after, leaving Nationwide, continuing to write and collaborate with Emily has been great. The same thing with so many of my team. There's, 3 or 4 of them that I still am able to work with in some degree or capacity. And so just, again, the people element of being able to build a team that was just so, I think so capable, the things that we're able to do with very few resources and on short timelines, mostly because we really believed in the work. It was a real, you had those halcyon days of just like everything wasn't going right, but we believed in what we were doing and the value of the work that we were doing. So in terms of impact, to have people say, we're at the Innovation Summit, and Professor Eleanor Carlson, who is at the Chan Medical School at UMass, she said, hey, my team and I found your white papers and we were so blown away and we wanted to talk to them. So to have people come back 3-4 years later and say, this was really impactful work and really valuable, that was the goal. It wasn't to say we're going to make this huge splash. It was like, let's create a piece of work that stands the test of time.
And I think you and Emily were both very good, because your work really, it still stands out in my mind when you presented it. And so not only was it practical and useful, you were very good at storytelling with it. Like you were able to.
That's all Emily. That's not me. That's yeah. That's
All
we're talking about
people,
skill sets. Yeah.
and she is very good at that. But I again, having impact, a lot of it is understanding these skills of how do we also make it memorable so that people can carry it forward and utilize it and make that impact. And so, yeah, shout out to you and Emily for being able to do that, because I think that's why you and Emily and the work that you did stood out. And I still remember hearing you. I'm sure you're like me too. We go to lots of events and conferences, and there's only a handful of talks that we probably still remember. And when you guys get up and present, I usually can remember your presentation.
That's very nice.
And you're just very good at doing that. So yeah, love that you were able to bring data and again, blend it with practicality and that storytelling element of it. And,
and it's marketing, right? I mean, let's face it, like you have to understand what your audience wants and how this solves a problem with them. Otherwise it's academic, which is also interesting to the right audience, but it's not necessarily going to make that impact that you're looking for.
I like that you made that connection. So that's what it is. Very good. And I know that data is still very important to you, and it's things that you're able to bring in. You've been part of the council, but now you're the chair of the Veterinary Innovation Council and doing a lot with data. Also, because I know one of the big things that you talked about that's important is improving our evidence-based ability. And I know that's a hot topic that probably deserves way more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Today. So maybe we can have you back, but all the things that you've learned and you're now able to be the chair of this really impactful organization that is able to, all the things that we've talked about, think creatively, be the people who can move the profession in the direction we want it to be, because change happens, right? And it would be really nice if the people who live it and breathe it and are passionate about it are the ones that are leading that change. And I think that's the ultimate mission behind the Veterinary Innovation Council. So we're coming off of a recent Veterinary Innovation Summit, which is kind of like the highlight of a lot of people's years. And just to kind of wrap up everything that you personally have gone through and now can start to pour into this organization, what does the Veterinary Innovation Council mean to you, and anything that's especially fresh from the veterinary innovation that comes up to you, if you want to share that with us too, that makes you excited about going forward?
All right, I'll try and be succinct.
That's a big question.
The Innovation Council, to me, and the best way I've found to articulate this, and I just shared something on this on LinkedIn, is the concept of the Overton window. So the Overton window is a political concept that talks about what is the level of acceptability of an idea within the public sphere. And it ranges from everywhere from policy through to sensible through to unthinkable. And so I see the role of the Innovation Council as looking at the outer reaches, kind of using this amazing brain trust of people we have on the council and saying, what do we think is 95% inevitable in the next 5 to 10 years that really isn't on the radar of many of the people in our industry that will change their lives in some way? Let's find a way to talk about that. Like, let's find a way to start the conversation if it's not there already. Let's find a way to progress the conversation if it's starting to be talked about. And I think the example that I use a lot is when we talked about Spectrum of Care. Spectrum of Care, Emily and I were one of many voices at that time who were kind of championing this. And I think started to have that conversation. And now pretty much every vet student knows about Spectrum of Care. Many practitioners know, and they may not fully understand kind of the intricacies of it. I think a lot of people think it's just options, but I see that as a massively successful kind of acceleration of a term that's come into our industry even over the last 5 years. And so one of the things about the Overton window that the council accepts and that we should all accept is if you're on the leading edge of an idea, when the idea is successful, people will not come to you. Majority of people will not come to you and say, I'm so glad you started that hard conversation 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I think the way I characterize in my LinkedIn post is there's no cookie for being early on the train. I think there's just the belief that the work is important and that you are making a difference in how this will impact our industry and our colleagues. So that's how I think about the work the Innovation Council does. This year, we were super deliberate in saying, okay, what are 3 or 4 focus areas that we want to make sure that we touch on? And there will be published work coming out on that, but also that will shape the Innovation Summit, which, as you said, is kind of like the jewel in the crown for us on an annual basis. And so we looked at, productivity and efficiency in practice. We looked at how is the cost of care affecting things at the moment? How do we increase accessibility of care? We looked at how is technology changing the way that we can practice across the spectrum of care, which goes into all the things that we talked about, evidence-based medicine, our ability to contact clients and connect with them on an individual basis. And then are there things that we should be looking at from human healthcare? And I think there was a lot of pushback on that, saying like, well, those guys suck. Like, why would we look there? And it's like, well, they've also spent billions of dollars looking at why they suck. There's probably some good stuff in there that we can tease out and say, and there are so many differences between us and human healthcare. Like there's no suggestion that we should be mimicking the things they do. But to hear from, Dave DeBronkart, who was one of our speakers, who just seems to blow everyone away with his keynote around being a patient advocate and, empowering our clients for us to be more client-centric, to understand that if they're going to use ChatGPT, how do we give them the prompts that they should be using and then help them understand, what that means? Like, let's look at the inevitabilities of how care progresses and make sure that we're playing the right role in that. So just one example of I think just some of the amazing conversations that we had. And so I'm so sorry you couldn't make it. I'm glad that you moved successfully, but I think just the feedback has been phenomenal so far, and just so proud of our program committee who helped put this together, and thankful for NAVC for their help as well. So it's just an amazing experience. So I'm still coming down. I'm still in the criticizing mode of well, that could have gone better, or this should have been this way, or whatever else. But overall, the feedback has been really good. So I'm super happy.
Yeah, I want to add maybe just two more things. One of the neat things about any conference, but especially the Veterinary Innovation Summit, is, the people that come to this particular conference are unique individuals because there's not continuing education. People are there to have these conversations, to talk and network about these things. And so sometimes they're really interesting conversations. We're all blown away by, you guys are amazing at getting amazing speakers. And so we're blown away by these keynotes, but sometimes the interesting takeaway are those conversations in between. Is there anything that comes to your mind that you kind of gathered from those in-between conversations, just from, colleague to colleague?
Well, so first of all, I think the feedback we got was exactly that there is amazing content. And this year especially, I think we're such a diversity of people on stage talking that people immediately left the room and then went outside and just had that conversation. And we tried to do a really good job this year of making sure that people who hadn't been before, felt welcome, and that they felt like that this was a place for them. I started out in the initial address by quoting one of our previous speakers, Susanna Fox, who said that, innovation can be lonely. And the whole point behind the Innovation Summit and the Innovation Council is you've got your bunch of weirdos. Whatever weird idea you have, you'll find someone at the Innovation Summit who shares that. Even if you can't collaborate with them, just sharing that and just getting that encouragement or getting that tweak to the thing that you were doing that helps you get to the next step. No, I 100% agree. It's absolutely the people that make it special. And we heard the same thing this year, that it was people there were people from corporations and we all know that everyone's budgets are struggling at the moment. There are many people that made a point of coming up and saying, I pay for this on my own because I wanted to be here, because I so value what I get from this. So there's an intimacy to the Veterinary Innovation Summit, should I say, that is special. And I don't think the goal is to grow it into an enormous conference, but I think we would encourage anyone who is the banner that we have this year is calling all change makers. And I do think that is an element of what we see, that we are on the edge of the Overton window in whatever area we're in. And we're asking people to say, okay, do you feel the same way? And how do we get to the next step? How do we get from unthinkable to radical? How do we get from radical to sensible? How do we make those leaps?
I think it's a good call to people to leave, to think about that and how they might be able to implement that wherever they may be, because we need that in every point of veterinary medicine, we need people to be thinking in that way. So the last question I always like to ask people before I end is, what is something that you are really grateful for?
I mean, the mentorship and the team, I think so much of my career has been luck, but I think it's happened because of the relationships I built along the way. I mean, I'm a very blue collar background, but I was very lucky in that I grew up in a country where my education was largely paid for. So that's the thing to be enormously grateful for. But I look at the friendships and the partnerships I've made along the way, and there's no possible way that I could be where I am today without so many of those.
If you'd like to keep exploring today's topics, I will link resources from the Veterinary Innovation Council, along with ways to connect with Dr. Jules Benson in the show notes. A few takeaways to carry with you. Veterinarians make an impact in the clinic, but the possibilities for influence across business, data, and innovation are wide open. Curiosity and creativity are essential for shaping the future of our profession, and thinking differently about your own career can open doors to meaningful impact you might not have explored quite yet. A special thank you to Dr. Kelly Cooper for supporting the podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. It's the best way to help more people discover inspiring voices in veterinary medicine. And as always, keep reimagining what's possible in veterinary life.